I'm very pleased to introduce the rest of the panelists. Professor Alon Peled. He is the chairperson of the Authority of Computers, Information and He is the chairperson of the Authority of Computers, Information and Communication of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He is a big data and open data researcher whose latest MIT Press book, Traversing Digital Babel, talk about great titles, right? Focused on some of this panel's ethical challenges. Professor Peled, will you join us? Yael Man-Shachar has an academic background in psychology and organizational consulting. In recent years, she specialized in a field called the psychology of technology, trying to lead on a daily basis the digital nutrition revolution. It's also important to note that Yael Man-Shachar and I, Dana Hochstein-Mann, are not related. Chris Longo is Chief Operating Officer of AmTrust Financial Group, a multinational insurance group that has used technology to digitize its process and disrupt several large U.S. markets. Chris? And it wouldn't be a panel in the future if I would only use written notes, right? Dr. Morit Be'eri, Director General of Aline Hospital, harnesses emerging technologies to the challenge of treating children with disabilities and has coined the phrase "ממוגבלויות בלתי אפשריות לאפשרויות בלתי מוגבלות," from impossible limitations to unlimited possibilities, maintaining that environment and digital accessibility is more important than physical abilities in determining quality of life. Thank you all for joining us today. Yeah? Within a quarter century, non-biological intelligence will match the range and subtlety of human intelligence. Anybody recognize this? Notable futurist Ray Kurzweil, explaining singularity, of course. We're going to get more neocortex, he says. We're going to be funnier. We're going to be better. We're going to be better at music. We're going to be sexier. We're really going to exemplify all the things that we value in humans to a greater degree. One more. Bill Gates recently told world leaders that bioterrorism, whether naturally occurring or manufactured by people, has the potential to kill more people than nuclear weapons. The next epidemic has a good chance of originating on a computer screen, he says, and adds that it could kill tens of millions of people, the Post reports. And then we have Microsoft Tie. Has anyone heard of Microsoft Tie? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. So I think it was 2016 or 2017, something like that. Microsoft introduced an AI, an innocent AI, that's what they say, chat robot to Twitter. And they had to remove it in less than 24 hours. Why? It transformed into an evil, Hitler-loving, incestual sex-promoting robot. This is because Ty's responses are learned by the conversations she has with real humans online. Lovely. This is one last quote by Juan Enriquez. He's a thought leader about what the changes in life sciences are going to do to business and politics and society. And he says, I think we're going to see a different species of hominid. I think we're going to move from Homo sapiens into Homo evolutus. Homo evolutus, a hominid that takes direct and deliberate control over the evolution of their species and others. And that, he says, would be the ultimate reboot, which I think is really cool. So this panel is going to focus on some of the moral and ethical dilemmas that face society as technology advances faster and faster. We've had some pretty fascinating conversations in prep for this panel, and I hope we're able to recreate them because they were very thought-provoking. So in 2006, the United States Department of Defense conducted a study to determine if military robots could be made to operate ethically. So the goal was to create a robot with an artificial conscience, right? So think about situations with decision-making with children in the room and things like that. And people say that robotic warfare may actually be more humane, as robots are probably less inclined to rape and pillage out of rage or revenge, right? Professor Ronald Arkin, he's an American roboticist and a roboethicist. He led the study, and he said, my intention in designing this is that robots will make less mistakes, hopefully far less mistakes than humans do in the battlefield. Now, Professor Peled, from your personal experience in the military, I know we're not quite there yet, at least not in Israel with robots replacing human soldiers, but from your experience, how is data science already influencing decision-making in combat situations?
Okay. Thank you, Dan. I'll share with you an interesting observations, not from my academic background, but from a military reserve duty. I'm an officer in a very interesting capacity, and I've served for 30 years in the IDF, beginning with the first Lebanon war. And in 2014, on August 2014, I found myself in a certain headquarters that was pretty much in charge of a good portion, like a really good portion of the fighting in Gaza as part of Operation Protective Edge, what we Israelis call Tzuk Eitan. And since I've been in the military for 30 years, and part of that time I've served in different headquarters, I had the privilege of observing both fighting and command technologies evolving and what people do with them. And I think one interesting observation I hope you'll find fascinating, but that's personal experience, is that actually what you call killer robots are already here. That they don't have arms and legs, but when you're using drones or even what used to be all regular tanks or all kind of intelligence means, you are using a lot of robots, a lot of AI, a lot of data science, a lot of the things that you're dealing in this conference. And all that enormous amount of data has to merge somewhere and to be integrated and analyzed. And even that part of the data integration happens much faster from many more sources. A lot of these sources are much more accurate. And typically, as the name of our panel implies, right, killer robots and mutant children, typically people think, oh, we are going to put all of that new power into bad use. We're going to do a lot more killing, a lot of people will get hurt. My observation is my practical observation from the summer of 2014 is that exactly the opposite happens. In practice, what happens is that commanders in headquarters, thanks to these technologies, actually are gaining for the first time, probably the first time in the history of military warfare, some privilege that they never had before. And that is time to think. In other words, where they were busy for all these thousands of years, having to deal with like survival of their troops, all of a sudden, for the first time, they can actually ask a new set of questions. For example, questions that concern the well-being of the non-combatant across the line on the other side. And it was there, I was there. Now, it's not that we didn't care before, but we never had the luxury of dealing with this. When those allegedly killer robots are taking from us certain decisions and allow us to integrate data much faster, we're not necessarily becoming, more merciless and more killer. We're actually gaining time to think and reflect on a new set of moral dilemmas and even come up with some interesting solutions. So later on in your questions, if you want, I can provide some even concrete examples.
Thank you. That's fascinating. And to add to that, Yael, you spoke to me earlier this week about research finding that there's less and less activity in the frontal cortex, and that's concerning. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's happening there?
In certain areas of the frontal cortex. Can I ask them a question in order to answer your question? Basically, I need to ask you, do you let yourself some absence time today in the digital world? Zman met. Do you ever find yourself sitting, waiting for the doctor, and just sitting like this? No. And suppose some of you said yes, okay? There are also still some weird people out there. So what about you waiting for your Gmail to upload, and you see like the internet is a little bit slow, so you have that waiting sign, that it's uploading the page. So are you waiting and looking at that sign, or are you waiting, opening a new page, checking your phone? You see where I'm heading with this, right?
All of the above.
What?
All of the above.
All of the above. Yeah, I'm waiting and I'm checking my phone. So we don't let ourselves some absence time. It's perfect. It's a new world. It's great. But apparently, absence time is correlated with the frontal cortex. Here in the frontal cortex, we have something called the imagination area, creativity, and, well, there's more, but decision-making. Those areas become very much active when we are like that, just being in absent, but we don't let absent. So that area is working less. Now, forget about my research. Ask yourself, do you get good ideas in the shower? Do you ever get good ideas in the shower? You should, by the way. If you don't, it's a big problem. So shower today is like the temple of the digital world. It's the only place where we don't let digital in, and we actually find ourselves in absence time. So in order to create more ideas and become better decision makers, we need ourselves, and especially the children. Children need to get bored. It's part of how the brain works. It's part how the brain develops. And that's what concerns us today, that we don't see on the fMRI, we see scans that prove that this area is less active.
So rather than what Professor Pellet was saying, where it's enable us, that available space is enabling us to make new decisions and more decisions, you're saying it's actually not entirely being fulfilled, and we're actually losing brain capacity.
Yeah, but the good news is actually it's not frightening. I agree with you. Once you hear that, you're supposed to understand what you need to do rather than what not to do. So if you create more absence times, like for example, you go to the toilet and you wait for someone to come out, to just let yourself be, just hang in there, just watch the door, and there you have it, some absence time, and you'll see your brain goes back to being active. It's not like the brain is lost. No, we're not there. We just need to balance up with the use of technology, and we're fine. That's what I think.
That's great. I feel like driving would be that way also.
Definitely.
Now, to add a little bit to Nimrod's introduction, as he said, I'm the director of Alinnovation. Okay, Alinnovation is an innovation track at Alin Hospital. So, full disclosure, we work together. I work with Dr. Moritz Berry, where we develop and commercialize assistive technology for children with physical disabilities around the world. And Alin Hospital is a pediatric rehabilitation hospital. Now, I'm not plugging. I'm actually introducing the next question because I feel like potentially I joined Alin about a year ago, but maybe I don't have that long of a future to stay there, because people talk about designer babies now, right? Parents choosing what color eyes their babies will have, or to what extent they'll be lactose intolerant. Are we facing a future, and is there something wrong with the future where children won't be born with congenital conditions?
I have absolutely nothing against the future with children without disabilities are born. Children who are born with disabilities face a difficult life. Our work at Alin Hospital and other similar institutions is to make this life a life full of quality and care and meaning. And the more technology advances means that the less we people actually need to use our physical body to reach our potential development in areas of thinking, developing. Digital information, accessibility technology means that we can reach everywhere even if we don't have legs. It means that we can operate system even if we only have to use our eyes. So it's not as if I'm promoting disabilities. I don't think that it's a better way to live. That there's a whole new world where people with a hearing impairment, they would kill me just for saying that, think that this is an alternate way of being and not a disability. So disability means that you're not able to do the things that other children do. It doesn't mean that you're sick. It doesn't mean that you are suffering. It doesn't mean that you're in pain. Our job is to prevent suffering, pain, and discomfort so that these children can achieve whatever they need, even if they don't have two perfect hands to work with. But I'd be absolutely wonderfully fine with children not being born with disabilities. However, we live in a complex world, and even if children are not born with disabilities, most of us acquire some kind of disability throughout our life. I mean, it could be a sports injury, it could be a car accident, it could be just growing old. I mean, this is something that I wish all of you to achieve, growing old. And we will all face physical limitations. And the question is, how can technology help us make sure that these physical limitations don't translate into quality of life deterioration? And here we have huge opportunities now with these worlds that are opening before us.
Can I ask a question? Interesting. I'm sitting next to an expert, so I wondered two questions. Number one, what do you think about genetic therapies that are actually happening now? People that are actually signing off, going through clinical trials. I have my opinion, but I want to hear yours because you sound very pro this.
So,
what's the fears, so to speak?
So I think every new technology brings on fear. And I think history has proved that this fear is not unbased, but usually it's not directed in the right direction. So people were terrified when Gutenberg's Bible was first printed because knowledge is going to come out of the hands of the people with knowledge. And I, frankly, am terrified from this condition in which everybody here is not here. You're all experts. But everybody out there on the internet is just as much of an expert on children's disabilities as I am, because everybody has a better answer than I do. And the egalitarian way in which technology just flattens the world is scary more than anything else. So genetic therapy is just a technology that could be used for the greatest achievement of mankind, could be misused, probably will make a lot of mistakes going down that road. Already we're using it. There are lots of children who are receiving therapies that are based on genetically modified viruses, that are based on drugs that are developed that way. Just going further down that road, I think that being scared of it is not going to help anybody. And regulations will always lag behind science and technology. They always run forward. It's about having open discussions and keeping it out in the open so that we can deal with the consequences.
Last question. Thank you so much. No, that's great. What about extending life? So we've heard even one of the speeches the other day, and as we continue to aging, the phenomenon of aging, we're making copies like on a photocopier. Every time we copy the cells, a little bit of degradation, and then we start to break down. What do you believe in repairing our code, so to speak, throughout lifetime and have treatments which will potentially extend our life beyond, 120 years? When someone mentioned close to 1,000 years. What about the socioeconomic impact of having all of us around? He said that the first baby that's going to extend beyond has already been born. It's going to extend beyond the life of 125 years. Have you thought of that, or is that...
Well, truth be told, I'm just thinking how far ahead I can be in Candy Crush by 1,000 years.
That's your downtime. That's good.
Exactly. So I don't really know. I'm more actually interested in better quality of life for the here and now than actually extending life to the point where... We've now reached a point in medical advances where we're really good at advancing life and we're very bad at actually maintaining the quality of life. And economical issues come into that, because if you only work 60 or 70 years and you still have to support yourself for the next 20, 30 years, who's going to carry that burden? And that's going to go on. And it's maybe belittling moral issues into numbers and figures, but it does all come down to that. It's about what do we do with this potential, and how do we make this life full of meaning? And are we going to fill it with, writing poetry and spending more time with our children and playing Candy Crush? Or are we going to spend it in hospitals with bed sores, depending on machines to keep us alive without something to think about with our frontal cortex, which has been damaged by overuse of screen time? So.
Chris isn't just asking about extending life out of altruism. Chris is a capitalist. He's a sci-fi fan, right? Sci-fi loving capitalist.
I'm not a geek because I don't hide it. I'm a nerd. Yes.
And Chris is in the world of insurance. So extending life has an impact. So Chris, how is AI impacting the world of insurance? Who's going to be out of a job in your industry?
Well, there are already people out of the job in the industry. We specialize, I'm from AmTrust Financial, we're multinational. We really specialize in commercial insurance. So we're trying to insure small, medium-sized businesses. And insurance is an archaic process, just like banking was. So fintech rushed in, started to automate, that are still automating that process. And now it's set its sights on insurance. Our company has grown through using technology for disruption. We went through 40 mergers and acquisitions. We developed technology to be able to merge other companies' information onto our core platforms. Massive expense savings using that process. But the unfortunate truth, and I'm not proud of it, I believe in capitalism, but I'm not.
I didn't mean to offend. I'm a capitalist as well.
My father would come smack me if I was too cold about it. But there are unfortunately many jobs lost through that automation. There were many manual jobs that were being performed by people that have been doing that for 20 or 30 years, just like manufacturing. We saw it happen in the steel industry. The Japanese came in and automated the process, produced better quality steel, cheaper in an automated fashion, and they crushed the American steel industry. My family, I'm from Pittsburgh, so I watched that industry die, and many of my family members are still impacted by that economically, and they had to pivot into as quickly as possible, pivot into other industries. Medical technology industries are prevalent there. Ohio's the same way. It was impacted. I live in the Midwest, the manufacturing area of the U.S., and we were decimated. Our jobs were decimated by automation in industry. So I'm in financial services now, but fast forward so many years later, it's the same process, the same unstoppable, insatiable process for more gains, for a cheaper way to manufacture. So what we do is we do automate processes. We use AI in insurance. It's not as fun as some of the things we're talking about. Not fun, or I should say interesting. Not fun, but it's not as interesting as some of the topics autonomous driving, or trying to protect us through military action and save lives and medical technologies. So I don't feel so cool up here in front of experts. And I took a much longer time in college, but I don't have my doctorate. I just enjoyed myself. So, true story.
You said you were a nerd.
Well, hey, watching all those movies, playing all those games. Candy Crush wasn't around. We were still playing Nintendo and Sony. But back to the impact on insurance. So the basic fundamental jobs, the automated, kind of the menial tasks, indexing documents, the shuffling documents around the basic logic around that has been automated, highly automated. But now we're getting to the point where we have the wherewithal with very specific deep learning algorithms on very specific tasks, like little threads of cognition, if you will, that are able to create a hive mind on decisions. And I'll give you an example. So in claims, as you're adjudicating claims, let's say we have 25 million situations, people injured, and we're dealing with the claims. There's a lot of information we're dealing with. You have to understand if someone hurts their back, their leg, what's the implications of that? What region are they in? Which hospital are they in? Which treatment are they being given? Which pharmaceuticals are being used? Which law firm is defending them? Which judge in the court system is being used? Whenever that judge works with that attorney, what's the outcomes? These are very complex problems. You never thought maybe insurance was that fun. I guess we're just big math shops that are good at we do our best to predict the future. So big data has been around in insurance. It's not a new thing. But you take that information, and one person's been working for 30 or 40 years. They have an incredible insight. Wisdom. What's wisdom? Failing constantly throughout life and finding out how not to do it the wrong way. So you call that wisdom, this intelligence. So you give one person, an experienced person, a specific problem to look at, and they have a solution based on their unique experience. Now, she has unique experiences, 30, 40 years in the industry as well. I give her the same problem. She may see a couple things differently. That's the beauty of human intuition. She may act a little differently. Go on, so on, so forth. If you do that for 1,000 people, if you can collect the actions historically over 15 years, over millions of transactions with the same problem, and have a collective reasoning of 1,000 people, and incorporate that into an algorithm that encompasses that thought process for that very specific problem, you have an algorithm that decides much more consistently than a human would, and you're able to boost the outcomes that you wish. And you do that for and that's one problem. Now you apply that to, and by the way, once you do that, what does the adjuster that spent 30 or 40 years to learn how to do that process, their role and their value that they brought, their experiences, becomes diminished. So it's not just the menial tasks that we're automating. We're automating some actual part of the creative process we as humans. We now have the ability to encapsulate the creative process mathematically. And that's frightening. So we're not just getting rid of the low income. We're actually starting to affect high income earners. So look at in insurance, last thing, at least for a second, we'll get back to other interesting things. But personal lines, so your personal automobile, automated prior to commercial insurance, as an example. And we used to have risk, whenever they'd look at your risks, they would guess, you're a good person, I'll insure you. You're a good person, I'll charge you this. You're a good person, I'll charge you that. Personal automobile encapsulated those into algorithms, pricing and elasticity studies. And now we're used to have a floor. It's almost like trading floors in the stock market. Underwriting floors in insurance companies are gone. All of our documents have been digitized. There's no file rooms. There's no people pulling files anymore. Everything's digitized. So decision-making departments are gone. And it's just following suit. It's going into claims adjudication. Then it's going to go into, and then actuarial sciences. We're actually automating the actual process of creating these algorithms where they are learning on their own. You're automating the actual process of data science and then doing prescriptive algorithms and then actually changing on the fly. This is where we're going with our company and letting them loose.
I understand how this is all wonderful for the people who are working in your industry, but how's that impacting us? Are our premiums going to go down?
Yes, yeah. For you, it's, yeah, for the insurance worker, I say that the first insurance person ever said your premiums will go down. But I had this argument with my father. He hates insurance, so he doesn't know how I got sucked into it. It was a mistake, actually. It happens to everyone in insurance. We don't mean to be in insurance. It just happens. Seriously. The first day in insurance, when you see a new kid coming in, a smart, bright kid, you tell them, run. Run before they sink their teeth into you and suck your brains out and you're stuck here. But, sorry. But my father always says, Chris, I've been paying auto insurance for 10 years. And I've never had an accident, thank God. Never had an accident. Why am I paying all this money? Give me my money back. Why don't I get it? Why don't I get it back? And I said, well, Dad, I go, look down your street. I go, you see your neighbor down there? He's a little crazy. He doesn't drive so well. He has lots of accidents. He's paying the same amount as you. It's a socialist kind of, we're spreading the risk out to everybody. So you're sharing in other people. If you're a responsible driver, way to go.
Chris.
Sorry.
Are my premiums going to go down?
Yes. So, and the reason why is because what we're doing is tailoring insurance. With these, we were only able to look at specific features. Whenever you're calculating risk or you're trying to predict the future and see how much you're going to pay, we're going to have to pay out in claims to you, we only had a few features and data points to go off of, very broad, high-level data. So I was classifying you into large, oh, you're a male between the ages of 25 to 40, so on and so forth.
You have a lot more information
job,
now.
College, so very high-level information. Your credit score is this. Now we're going more towards usage-based insurance. So what we're going to do is tailor insurance solutions for you. So you see this with usage-based driving. So it's common now where you have a little dongle that plugs into your car or your smartphone's tracking your driving behaviors. Do you brake too fast, go too slow? And we're learning how you drive. So you have very tailored, very specific, very personalized insurance to you. So if you're a responsible citizen and you're risk-averse, you're not going to pay as much as the wackadoo down the street that's crazy.
So if you have a kid who's diagnosed with discordant developmental disorder, which means being clumsy, but you have a scale for that, and that goes on his file when he's 5 years old, and that goes into his medical file, and he reaches driving age, will he pay more insurance then?
Yes.
Because, yeah.
Yes, because that's the reality. It's a math problem. We're just a financing arm of the world, right? And that's sad, pre-existing conditions. That's the problem with healthcare.
And the family with the kid with disability, they will pay more health insurance.
Or if you have cancer, you don't have insurance, how do you go get insurance so that your family's wealth's not decimated trying to help you? I'm not in health insurance, so that's my parachute out of this conversation.
Thank you, Chris. That was very interesting. In a few years, we'll take a look at my premiums. But you actually said something before about Dr. Berry's knowledge, and there's a distinction between information and knowledge. I'm not quite sure how data science refers to that, but we know that knowledge is power, right? Is more knowledge, is more information, is big data superpower, or is it about to lose its value? Peter Diamandis, the founder of the X Prize Foundation, talks about meta-intelligence, a future in which everyone's highly connected brain to brain, right? Sharing thoughts and knowledge, sharing actions. And I'm wondering if knowledge is about to become a free resource, sort of like Wi-Fi. How do we even handle having access to this massive amount of information and or knowledge? Is data science preparing us for that kind of future?
Thank you, Dana. Start with the bottom line. Knowledge is absolutely not going to be free like Wi-Fi. It's going to become good knowledge, and good information. It's going to become a lot more expensive. In 1985, one of the kahunas of the information age, Stuart Brand in Menlo Park, said a sentence. And for some reason, the entire humanity remembers only the first half of the sentence. Stuart Brand said, information wants to be free. And then he said the other half of the sentence, and everybody forgot the other half of the sentence. And so the complete sentence from Stuart Brand, it's kind of like a mentor to Steve Jobs, was that the entire information age is going to be defined by a struggle between information wants to be free and information wants to be expensive. Just conveniently, we forgot the other part of the sentence. Now, all organizations, public, private, and non-profit organizations today are defined by the information assets they hold. And you take away from the Treasury, the budget book, or the Ministry of Interior, the Registry of the Population, and there is no ministry. I mean, it's not really about having desks or buildings. It's about the information they own. Are they going to release it for free, even if we could have overcome some of the ethical problems? No way. It defines the very organization, those information assets. I think the interesting story here is about the relationship between open data, that's the revolution that President Obama started, former President Obama started on May 21st, 2009, which is kind of information wants to be free, and what's happening in the real world and all this bartering, information for money, knowledge, and so on and so forth. I think that the real game for organization, and it's a tough game, and they're only beginning to play it, is to find the demarcating lines between what information they own that they can free on the web, and what information they own which they should do exactly the opposite, which means finding the clients, finding people who are interested in this information. The information that is released on the web for free is not bad information. Often it has very bad metadata to define that describes it. It's good information, but it's only a very, very small part of the information that very large organizations own. You need to be fairly sophisticated or have certain types of help to basically siphon through this information and make value out of it. The majority of the information that organization owns is closed data. It's not opened. It defines the very organization, and pretty much the bottom line of all these organizations is based on that.
Thank you. Do you see, what's the relationship between data science and I guess maybe cybersecurity, right? So this increase in flow of information and knowledge in new ways and in different ways, and soon from, again, brain to brain. What's the relationship between the technology side of data science and cybersecurity, about how to protect the data and maybe enable more control, less control, controlling the levels of control that companies have, governments have, societies have? That's probably going to have a huge impact on the difference between societies and first world and developing countries, et cetera.
That's a very good question. If you might find the following observation interesting. Usually when we say big data and data science, and they go often together for good reasons, we think about threats and what's going to happen to my privacy, and what's going to happen to big brother government, and so on and so forth. And very few people actually raise their hands, and I'm one of them in that recent book they wrote, and said, wait a second, that new brave age of big data and data science, for the first time in history, actually empowers us to introduce a whole new generation of data privacy protections that were never available before. Let me give you an example. In Estonia and Sweden today, if someone in the Ministry of Housing touches your file, you get an email. Now, if you applied for a mortgage, then, that makes sense, right? Great. Something about my application is moving. Someone is checking. If you don't have any business with the housing and you bought your last house 15 years ago and you're happy, why is someone in the Ministry of Housing touching my file? Now, you could have never afforded that kind of data privacy protection mechanism in the old paper-based world. You didn't have that thick and rich metadata layer. Metadata is data that describes other data. You never had it before, so you couldn't even develop that level of data privacy protection. So my point, and I'll say it again probably a couple of times, is like there's nothing really inherently bad in data science or BI or in big data. It's a lot about how we use them. It goes back to the questions we started with. If we put more sophisticated data science at the hand of officers in the battlefield, they're not necessarily going to do bad things without it. They actually can, for the first time in history, think more about the well-being of the non-combatant on the other side. You understand what I mean? It's the same thing. So the question is really, what are you going to do with that stuff? And I'm actually hopelessly optimistic. When I'm finding a lot of good examples of people doing very decent and very moral and ethical things when they have more data science tools at their hands.
Can I add a positive, not a
Please.
negative, to that? And it's along the lines of medical technology, medical field. So using data science, another huge advantage aside from security is just, let's say there's a great story, I think it's a success story, where there's a new data science tool that came out. It's Israeli. Some of the best stuff I've ever seen. This piece of software blew my mind, and we've seen so much tech in the last several years. So a great story. They were in town. The gentleman was giving a lecture, and there was a specialist, I think the Switzerland, chief medical officer of Switzerland, I believe, and she had, this doctor had been spearheading a research project for 7 years. Tons of money, tons of big pharma companies, clinical trials, trying to identify early indicators for colon cancer, for a screening technology. And she heard his speech and was intrigued by the data science techniques and how they can actually pull together insights from the data. And she got together, contacted them and said, hey, I have to fly in a few hours. Can you stop by? I have a massive amount of data with me from our research. I brought it along with me. It's on a thumb drive. Could I please come by and maybe we can perform a little analysis on this? And the gentleman said, it doesn't quite work that way. There's a little bit more setup time. But he said, come on by, let's see what we do. So the gentleman put the unstructured data in, some structured, some unstructured data into his model. And within 1 hour, it gave hypotheses for what the computer, given all of the criteria that it sees, all the data, all the correlations that it made that a human being cannot do across the multitude of data sets in a lifetime or even capable of doing. And in 40 minutes, he put a stack ranked list of what the computer guessed were the biggest causes or the best likely chance of indicating early colon cancer. And the doctor looked at it and was like, okay, that's strange, just a coincidence. And then she stopped a few down and went, oh my God, how did you know that? And what the algorithm did is it identified a protein, a protein marker on a specific cell that was an indicator that was correlated to, and he said, why are you interested in that? And she said, that marker took us 6 years of research, and I don't want to tell you how much money, to identify as a probable, success to this project, and you just found it in 40 minutes. And so there's a tremendous amount of good that can come from this, not losing jobs, not doing terrible things in the military field, but the insights that we can have to improve quality of life, honestly, is compelling. There's so much good that can come from this if used by the right people and for the right purposes.
It all boils down to that at the end of the day, how we end up using technology, I think. And thank you for taking us back to health. You know, you can't really have a panel on morals and ethics and technology these days without talking about the big dilemma of the autonomous car, right? When the car is faced with a situation where it can either save its owner's life, say the owner is the sole person in the car, and the car has to decide how to behave on the street. Either it saves its owner's life and sacrifices a car nearby, maybe a car with a family, a bus full of school children, right? Or does it sacrifice its owner's life and saves more people or children, right? It's this question. Now, what interests me in the context of this panel and this question is not what's the right answer, but who should be making this decision? What's the right answer? Who should be deciding what the car should decide? Who should be deciding how to program the car? Is it Elon Musk? Or is it the car owner? Maybe every car decides for himself, him or herself. Is it the chief rabbinate when you come to Israel? And these types of dilemmas aren't introduced to society with the autonomous car. Every year there's a committee in Israel, and I assume in other countries as well, that gets together to decide which medications and which treatments will be included in the healthcare system that the citizens receive and which won't. These are not decisions these are not easy decisions to make. And I know, Dr. Be'eri, you have I don't think you sit on the committee, but you are close to it and know how that works, and you have some insights on that. What are your thoughts on who should be making this decision, how to program the autonomous car?
So, not me. Really, I do not want to sit on this committee. It's impossible. These decisions, there's no right and wrong. When people are in need and people are in pain, for them, their cause is the leading cause. And what we do see is that the more people have the public eye and they're more visible and they can kind of show you their pain, they have more chances of actually receiving the money that they need. And I think this is one of the conditions in which big data and insurance should really play more of a role. I know it's maybe taking a step back from the moral issues, but when I look at the last decisions that are made now, I treat a lot of children with muscular diseases, and I think my work for them stands to protect me from what I'm about to say. So this year, the Ministry of Health has put into the health basket, that's what it's called in Israel, a drug that will benefit about 60 to 80 people at the cost of 3 or 4 other drugs that would have benefited so many more people, because pictures of sick children in wheelchairs are more appealing than older people. And I think I stand behind this thing because there's no research behind this decision. There's no good data behind this decision. This is a decision that is based on hope and charity and sense of doing good. I don't think this is how decisions on a large scale should be made, and I'm actually looking forward to the time where we can actually put more data into our computers and come out with at least some decision trees that we'll be able to follow more, I would say, in a more balanced way.
Morit, in one sentence, the autonomous car decision. We talked about this, about the government controlling information, the difference between a nanny state and anarchy. So in one sentence, in your view, is it the car owner? Is it the government?
Well, probably it will end up being the user themselves.
Who should be making these decisions?
It will go back to the user themselves that will make those decisions. I mean, those will be open and people will regulate and decide whether they want this to be pay cheaper for a car and take that risk on themselves, or maybe have somebody else take the risk on themselves. I think this is something that the market will decide down the road. I don't think that anybody will be sitting and morally deciding who's going to take the blame for that kind of decision.
One last question. Yael, we can't end this panel without hearing from you about, what was it? The digital nutrition revolution?
Just for the last sentence to sum up this conversation about where technology is taking us, my personal opinion, just like yours, to a very good place. We need to look at this whole technology revolution the same way we did with nutrition. It's not the same thing, but the core idea is the same. We took nutrition into our life and we start consuming sugar like crazy, and we were not sure what's good or not good to give children. Now we know. Now we go to the supermarket and we raise the product and we have everything written down and we are aware. We need to do the same thing with technology. We need to know where is the tipping point, where is that gold point where too much of media, so social media is how much is social media is bad for children after 2.5 hours, give or take, until the age of 14. We have the information. Now you, the crowd, and us, we need to consume it, and then we're going to enjoy the next generation, the next developing technology like we should. This is what I call nutrition of technology.
Hear, hear. Thank you for that. In closing, a few days ago on January 22nd, an author named Ursula K. Le Guin passed away at the age of 89. And Dr. Be'eri pointed this out to me and suggested that this panel would be a nice opportunity to pay a tribute to her, because she was named by the New York Times in 2016 the greatest living science fiction writer. She wrote the Earth-Sea Fantasy, among others. She was also a poet of the Earth-Sea Fantasy series, The Left Hand of Darkness, The Dispossessed, The Telling. And I thought I would close with this quote of hers, which isn't in a novel, but she actually said it on a panel. She said, "In reading a novel, any novel, we have to know perfectly well that the whole thing is nonsense. And then while reading, believe every word of it. Finally, when we're done with it, we may find, if it's a good novel, that we're a bit different from what we were before we read it, that we have been changed a little, as if by having met a new face, crossed the street we never crossed before. It's very hard to say just what we learned, how we were changed." So I hope you learned something and that maybe you were changed a little by this panel. Thank you very much and enjoy the conference.